Hey everyone, I want to welcome you to Leasing for Landlords, and today we're going to be discussing market rent. Okay, so today what we're going to be covering is what the definition of market rent is. We're going to discuss the three P's, product, price, product, and placement. And for placement, for us, that's going to be location of the property. How to determine what to charge for your rental property, how and when to adjust that market rent, and then using pricing thresholds to determine how much of an adjustment we should actually make. And then finally, we're going to show you how to analyze your marketing and leasing activity to evaluate your market rent and see if an adjustment is actually necessary. So why is it important to understand the overall market rent? Well, first off, a properly priced home, it rents, and it rents fast. It helps attract the right type of residents to your property. And of course, it's about money. It's going to help you pay your bills. It's going to put cash in your pocket. And it's going to increase the value of your property as well. The more that property makes, the more valuable that asset becomes. So market rent is what a potential renter is willing to pay at any given time, and that can change. It's a moving target. So just because it rents for one amount in January doesn't necessarily mean that it will rent for the same amount 6 months or 8 months down the road. It could be less, it could be more, but it is a moving target. And these are they depend. That moving target, that price, depends really on the market conditions and of course the three P's. The price, the product, and the placement. All those things affect the market rent. Now on the price side, price is the effective rate basically that's going to cost a renter to move in and live in your property, and this is going to include things like your rent, security deposits, any additional fees like your application fees, pet fees, administrative fees, whatever it is that you charge. All of those things are going to factor in, and the overall effective rate is what's going to be included in that price. Now for product, we're talking about the property. We're talking about the appearance of the property, what comes with the property, like the amenities, the utilities, if there's a pool, or not utilities, appliances, if there's a pool, all of those things that come with the actual property as part of the product. And really the way that this is set up in terms of the condition and the way that it appears and the way that it presents is going to be one of the very first impressions that tenant has of you as a landlord. If you make sure it's clean, you make sure things are repaired, all those things, it's going to set you off on the right foot. And those relationships, as we'll discuss later, are important. So the appearance of the product is very important. Now, placement, of course, or location is where the property is located, and this can include the neighborhood, any of the surrounding properties. I also kind of lump into this into like laws or regulations for that particular area as well, because you can't do anything about those. So the placement is kind of a fixed thing, and really the only way we can really deal with that is at the purchase or at the time of sale. When you purchase that, you hopefully looked at all those factors and made a decision that you could work around them, because there's not a whole bunch you can do after the fact. Now, how do we go about setting the correct market rent? Well, again, we can't change the placement of the property, so we're going to have to work with the price and the product itself. And now there are some tools that kind of help us zero in on what that market rate should be. And then once we set an initial rate, we kind of have to watch and analyze the activity, see what's happening with the traffic, with the leasing activity, and then make adjustments from there. Now, some of the rules that we can use to determine what the market rent should be, there's like a 1% rule. This is kind of a rule of thumb type approach. You can use rent estimation services. They're just basically websites. Some are free, some are paid. You can use a market survey, and then you can use a tool like a property comp grid, property comparison grid. Now, that 1% rule, what this is basically saying is that the rent should be somewhere around 1% of the property value. And if your market can't sustain that, then it's probably a good idea to pass on that purchase. But for example, if the house value is $130,000, you should theoretically be able to get somewhere in the range of about $1,300 a month in rent for that. Again, this is a quick, simple rule of thumb, and it's not going to hold up in every market. There may be some very high-end markets that you're in, and you can figure it out real quick by just running a few tests, seeing what's out there, seeing what the value is, and see if it comes close. And we're not talking within $2, $3, $4, $5. $100 either direction, just in the range, the general area, or the general price range there is what we're looking for here. Now, on the rent estimation services or sites, there's a number, and I'll leave some of these in the resource section. But basically what you do here is you plug in the property's information. And I like the websites with the maps because then you can kind of see where all the comps are and how close they are. But this is Rent-A-Meter here, and as you can see, I plugged in some basic information on the property, and it's coming up with an average rent, a median, and the different percentiles, and it's showing where the other comparable properties are. So that's a good way to kind of look to see what else is out there. And on some of these services, they'll show what's currently for rent, and you can even look on some of them for what's like off the market. But on those, be careful. You want to see if you can determine when it actually rented or when it was on the market. That way, you're not looking at information that was from 2 years ago, because that's not going to be very helpful. Okay, now on market surveys, basically what this is just you're researching what other like properties are renting for. And you can, again, use those internet listing services to search for comparable properties, which Rent-A-Meter and Zillow and some of those things are along those lines. You can then document that on a property comp grid, and what you do is you take the variances between the two properties and compare them, and then adjust the rent up or down based on how those stack up against each other. So this is an example of a property comp grid, and in another video we'll go over this a little more detail in another video. But as you can see in column 1, there is a subject property, and all you're going to do is take your property and list all your information there. And then that you see 3 other columns, comp 1, 2, and 3, and that's where you put the other properties numbers and information in. And again, we're going to have an in-depth video on how to use this in a separate video coming up. Okay, now when you've set the rent and things started moving along here, and you're seeing what kind of activity you're getting, what kind of calls, what kind of tours are being scheduled, things along those lines. If the home isn't renting, if the unit isn't renting, it may be time to think about an adjustment to the market rent. And again, the way that we do this is we use the traffic and activity to determine if your market rent is set correctly for that period in time. Really, I like to look at this every 7 to 10 days. It kind of depends on how aggressive you want to be. And then I use pricing thresholds to kind of open that up to new groups of prospective renters.